Let me show you how to build a Spring Boot application that tracks stock prices using a real financial API. You'll learn how to call third-party APIs, transform data into custom responses, and build the basis of a nice portfolio project that you will be able to easily expand. On screen, you can see the technologies that you need to have pre-installed on your machine if you want to follow along. And here is another list of the topics that will be covered during this video. Let's take a look at this diagram. So here we can see our stock tracker, which is going to be our Spring Boot application. This is going to be communicating to a SQL database and is going to be requesting stocks data to this stock API. We're going to take a look later in which API we're going to be using to retrieve data. You can also see that we have added caching, and that's because this stock API has some limits in the free tier, and ideally in a real world example you still want to have some kind of caching in order to avoid overloading the third-party API or increasing your bill. It really depends on your usage. Of course, if you want real-time data, adding caching at this point might not be ideal, so just so you know, these are the trade-offs. Here on the left, you can see the endpoints that we're going to be implementing. So our stock tracker is going to be supporting 5 endpoints. Most of them are get endpoints. We're going to be looking at this endpoint implementation later on in the video, but this is to show you an overview of what you can expect to build during this video. So let's start looking at the stock data provider that we'll be using throughout this video. Looking around, I found this API called AlphaVantage that offers a free tier that we can use for this portfolio project. So if you go to alphavantage.co, this is the page you should get to. Now click on Get Free API Key, and this will take you to this page over here. What you need to do is simply fill this very short form, put your email and click on Get Free API Key. This is going to generate a API key that you need to save somewhere safe. We will need it later in the video to be able to call AlphaVantage. I also want to say this video is not sponsored by AlphaVantage, so this is just one of the free APIs I found, and I thought they had some good documentation and it was easy to use. So if you actually go on the documentation, you have some really good examples that you can take a look, but we're gonna go through some of these endpoints later in the video. If you go back to the Claim Your Free API Key page, we can also see some more information about the usage and the limits of this API service. We are going to be using the free tier. In this case, you're going to get 25 requests per day, and I think they are quite enough for this project. The next thing we now need to do is go on Spring Initializer and create our starter Spring Boot project. So I'm going to call it Stock Tracker, and we will be using Spring Boot 3.5.5 with Java 17. We also need some dependencies, so let's start by adding Spring Web. We're going to be using Lombok. We need JPA, MySQL driver. We are also going to need the H2 database. H2 is a fast in-memory database. So instead of building and using a whole MySQL instance of, let's say, an Oracle database, we will just be using this lightweight DB for this project. And we also need reactive web. I think this is all we need in terms of dependencies. Let's click generate and let's open the downloaded project in IntelliJ or any IDE if you're choosing. I have opened the downloaded project in IntelliJ. The first thing we need to do is actually open the pom.xml file and add the dependency that we forgot to add earlier, and that dependency is Spring Boot started webflux. This dependency is actually going to provide us the web client we will need later to send requests to AlphaVantage API. Just add this to your dependencies in the pom.xml. So we are now ready to write some code. We're going to be implementing the endpoints I've showed you earlier. Let's go to main Java, and in here let's create some packages. So the first one is the controller package. We're going to need a service package and a client package, and we're going to fill them out in a moment. So the first thing we're going to create is a stock controller in the controller package. And in here, we're going to be putting all our endpoints. So we want to tag this as a REST controller, and we want to add the request mapping, and let's add the base request path, which is going to be API/v1/stocks. And we already know that we're going to be using a stock service, so let's add it. And let's inject it in the constructor. So we need the auto wired. So this is red because we have not created this class yet. We're going to create it in a minute. But before that, let's actually start by creating our first endpoint, which is going to be a get endpoint. So we're going to use get mapping. This is going to take as input a stock symbol. If you don't know what a stock symbol is, it looks something like this. So every company that is on the stock exchange has a stock symbol associated to it. So for example, this is Apple's symbol, this is Microsoft's, and this is Google's. That's what I mean with stock symbol. And this one is going to be returning as a stock response. GetStock is the name of the method associated to this endpoint, and we're going to be accepting a path variable, which is going to be our stock symbol. And then we're going to return the response from our stock service, and I'm going to call this method in the stock service getStock for symbol. And we're going to be passing the symbol we got as input. We're going to pass it as an uppercase. Let's fix some of this red. Let's go into the service package and let's create a service class, which is going to be called stock service. And let's tag this as a service class. Let's go back to our controller. Let's import this, and we can see the red is gone. Let's also create the stock response. So it's going to be empty for now, but we'll fill it out later. For this, I'm going to be creating a new package called DTO. DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. So whenever there is any kind of object that is being transferred over the network, this is ideally a DTO, a Data Transfer Object, and we're going to put all of our DTOs in this package. So in this case, the stock response is the response object we're going to be returning to our client. So this is a good candidate to be a DTO. Let's go back to our controller and let's import this. So at least the error is gone. Later on, we're actually going to fill in this class with some attributes. But for now, let's go back to our stock controller. The only thing that is left to implement is this getStock for symbol in our stock service class. So the first thing we're going to be doing here is actually creating the method. So this is going to be a public stock response. This is going to be called getStock for symbol. As input is going to be getting a stock symbol. We are going to be using a stock client to call an endpoint in AlphaVantage API. Let's actually go up here and let's create a stock client. And let's inject this into the constructor, public stock service, and let's inject the stock client. This is red because it doesn't exist yet, so let's create it in the client package. Let's call it stock client, and this is going to be another kind of service class, so let's add the service tag. Let's go back again to our stock service, let's import this, and the error is gone. What we really want to do in this getStock for symbol is take this symbol as input from the user and then using the stock client, send a request to AlphaVantage API and get back a response, which is going to be a stock response. And the stock response is going to contain the price of the stock for that specific moment. So stock client, let's get a stock quote given the stock symbol. And then we actually want to return a new stock response. So this stock response does not exist yet, but we'll create it in a bit. Let's go to our client class. And in our client class, we actually want to use a web client to query AlphaVantage API. So I'm going to create a web client, and to inject it into the constructor, I'm simply going to add a required args constructor, which is a Lombok annotation, and this is going to inject the web client inside the stock client constructor. This is just another way to auto-wire dependencies. Another thing we actually need to do before being able to write the get stock request to AlphaVantage is actually a configuration for web client. And to do that, we're going to create a new package called config. In here, we're going to create a configuration class called web client config. Because this is a configuration class, we want to add the configuration annotation. And let's create a bean. And this bean is going to be of type web client. Let's call the method client. And this is going to be taking as input a web client dot builder. And it's going to be taking this builder as input. And we want to be adding the base URL. So the base URL is actually the endpoint we are going to be calling. So it's the base of the AlphaVantage API. If you go back to the AlphaVantage documentation, we can actually see that all of the endpoints that we are going to be using, they start with alphavantage.co/query. We are actually, in this case, going to be using this global quote endpoint. So if you search for global quote, you can see this is the endpoint we're going to be calling. So it's going to be taking some query parameters as input. So one is global quote. That's because there are different functions being provided by AlphaVantage. We're going to then take as input a symbol. In this case, it's whatever the client has passed as input, and the API key that we got earlier. So if you click on it, this is how the response is going to look like. So we can see that we get some open price is the high price of the day, the lowest, and the current price. We don't want all of these attributes in our response. We just want some of them. And those are the ones that will go to the stock response DTO we created earlier. But we'll see that in the next step. Let's go back to our code. As you can see, this is a value. So we need to configure this in the application.properties. So if you go to resources, application.properties, let's add this base URL over here. This is going to look like this. So it's quite simple. The web client configuration is done. So we can go back to our stock client, and now we can actually send a request to AlphaVantage. One thing we forgot to add is actually the API key. So over here, we will need the AlphaVantage API key, and we're going to store it in a string. So we need to take this value, go back to the application.properties, and in here, you're going to add your own API key. I'm not going to paste my API key, obviously, just so editing is going to be easier for me. But in here, don't forget to put the API key you got from the step earlier. So let's go back to our stock client. One thing we can notice is this error. So this error is very annoying. It might be also hard to detect sometimes. It's because this import is wrong. We don't want the lombok.value. We actually want the Spring Framework value annotation. So just fix this. You can actually remove the import and put this one manually, and the error is now gone. And we can actually do a call to the AlphaVantage API. So this is going to return an AlphaVantage response. This is how it's actually going to look like. So we're going to be using the web client, and we're going to be doing a GET request with these query parameters. As I showed you, we're going to be calling the function global quote. We're going to be passing the symbol and the API key. And then we're going to be saving this response into this object called AlphaVantage response. So this is going to be another DTO. Let's create this DTO in the DTO package. So AlphaVantage response. So you can see this is a class at the moment, but I wanted to show you something a bit different. So instead of a class where we have to then create a builder, getters and setters and constructors, we can actually have this as a record. So we can have this as a public record AlphaVantage response. If we go back to our documentation, we can see that at the top level, we are sent back an object that is called global quote. And this global quote then has a bunch of attributes inside it. And we only want few of these attributes. For example, we are interested in the price. So it has some strange names like 05.price. We need to reflect this in our decoding in our Spring Boot application. So if you go back here, you can see that I've created a global quote record inside this Alpha Vantage response record. This global quote has the symbols and the price and the latest trading day. As you can see, we have to define the JSON property that we want to deserialize from the JSON into the attribute in our Spring Boot application. We've got a record and then a child record, let's say. Why are we using a record? Records were introduced relatively recently in Java 16. They're gaining popularity for the right reasons. When you create a record, we save a lot of boilerplate code, so we don't have to write getters, setters, or a canonical constructor because that's already given to us, along with the hashcode functions and the equals function. So it's quite powerful and saves us a lot of time. Whatever we could do earlier using Lombok, now just out of the box. And you should only use records to represent immutable objects. That's quite important to remember. So let's go back to our stock client and let's import this Alpha Vantage response. All the red is gone. Let's go back to the stock service and you can see the red is gone also here. But we still need to do some changes. We know that this getStock quote actually returns an Alpha Vantage response. So let's get that. To our controller, we want to return a stock response. As we saw, we only getting 3 properties. That's literally what we want to return back to the client. So if we open stock response, we can again create a record. And so that way we'll have a setter and a getter already out of the box. In this case, I've also added a builder annotation. It's just going to make our life a bit easier when creating this object over here. So now we can simply go back here to our service class and do a return stock response. And we're going to be building a symbol. So this symbol is going to be coming back from the response.globalQuote.symbol. Then we want the price. So this should work. And the last updated, which is the last trading day. We have built a stock response using the answer we got from Alpha Vantage API. So this can be a final as well. Let's go back to our controller and all the red is gone. What I'm going to do now is actually go to the application.properties. Let me add my API key because what we're going to do now is test our application. So let's go back to our controller. We're going to be testing this get endpoint. Let's go up here and let's create a new configuration for our application. We're going to call it stock tracker. Let's add the main class. Let's click apply and OK. Let's run this. So this application has started successfully. Let's call this endpoint over here. I found this really nice plugin called API Tool, which is going to allow us to send requests from IntelliJ, so we don't need to use Postman. So if you go here, let's go to stock controller. We can see that I'm going to be sending a request to the local host 8080, and here we need to add the stock symbol. So the value is going to be Apple. So let's see if this works. Yes. So as you can see, we got the price back from Alpha Vantage. So Apple's price is 230.49, which is the closing price. And it's in the format we actually expected. So this is looking good now. We have implemented the initial endpoint. Let's move on to the next one. So the second endpoint we're going to be implementing is this one, the get API stocks, symbol, and overview. So this overview is another endpoint inside the Alpha Vantage API. So if you go to the Alpha Vantage documentation and let's look for overview, we can see this overview endpoint, and if you open it, you can see it gives you a lot of information for a specific stock symbol. So in this case, for IBM, it gives you all of this information, address of the company, official site, and a lot of other data. This can be quite useful if you want to retrieve data from AlphaVantage and maybe have some kind of AI processing this data to maybe do some kind of predictions of future prices or some other kind of financial analysis. I can also see things like EBITDA, P ratio, the book value, and all these other relevant information. We are going to be implementing this endpoint. Let's close this. Let me stop the application and let's go back to our controller. So in our controller, we're going to be adding another get endpoint. It's going to get a stock symbol as a path parameter, and then it's going to have overview as well. And this is going to be returning a stock overview response. So this looks good. So get stock overview, we have a path variable, which is again our stock symbol. And then inside the stock service, we're going to be calling the stock overview for symbol. And the symbol is going to be passed as a uppercase. So far so good. Let's go to stock service. In here, let's create this new method. So I'm going to be calling this public stock overview response. Get stock overview for symbol. This is gonna get a string as a input symbol. It's going to be doing something similar to what we did earlier. Let's directly return stock client dot get stock overview. We're gonna get the overview for the symbol. So as you can see, this is red, and that's because this DTO does not exist yet. So let's create one called stock overview response. Let's go back to our service class. Let's create this get stock overview inside our stock client. So if you open the stock client, what you want to do here is get a public stock overview response. Get stock overview given the symbol, and we're going to be using the web client. This time we're going to be using the function overview, and the symbol is going to be the same, and we're going to be passing the API key, and we'll be getting back a stock overview response. As I showed you earlier, there are a lot of properties being returned by this endpoint in AlphaVantage API. We are not interested in all of them, or maybe you are, this is up to you. In our example, we're just going to be getting back few properties. So if you open the stock overview response, as I said earlier, records are great. So I'm going to be creating this as a record. We're going to be only saving these properties. So this looks good to me. We can go back to our stock client. This is looking good. Let's go back to our stock service. So we need to import this. And now let's go back to our controller. Let's import this as well. And we have implemented another endpoint. So we can do a quick test. Let's run this and let's open our API tools. Let's do a quick refresh. We can see this other endpoint. Let's do IBM this time. Let's click send. As you can see, we got back only the data we wanted, and this is looking really good. The response is as we expected. For example, let's say I wanted Apple. I think it's APL. And here you go, you get Apple's information. So let's now implement the next endpoint. Let's take a look at our diagram. So the third endpoint is this other get endpoint that gets you the history of a specific symbol. So this is going to return the historical data. So if you go to AlphaVantage documentation and you look for time series daily, we can see this endpoint over here. And this is going to return you all the data for a specific time frame. So in this case, I believe this is for the last 30 days. This is another interesting endpoint that you might find useful. Let's go back to our code and let's go to the controller. And in here, let's implement this other endpoint. I'm gonna do it a bit quickly because I think you got the point. It's going to be quite similar to the ones above. This is going to look like this. We're gonna have a get mapping. We're gonna pass a symbol and then call this history endpoint. The thing to remember is that this time we've also got a request parameter, so which are the days that you want to retrieve. So in this case, I've also added a default value of 30. This is up to you. So we also have a daily stock response. So this is going to be a list of daily stock responses. So we actually want to create this DTO called daily stock response. If we go in here, we are only interested in few data points. First of all, we're going to have it as a record, and we're going to have all these attributes that we're going to be getting back and sending back to the client. So let's go back to our controller. Let's import this. And now let's go back to the stock service. So in this stock service, we're now going to implement the getHistory method. So this is going to be returning a list of daily stock responses, get the history, and we'll have to pass the string symbol and the days. We're going to be getting a response back from the stock client. So stock client.get stock history for a specific symbol, story. Let me first implement this method in the stock client. If you open stock client, let's add another endpoint integration. This is going to be taking a symbol as input and is going to be returning a time series. It's going to be using the time series daily function of Alpha Vantage API. Let's create this other DTO stock history response. If we go to the DTO, let's create the stock history response. Again, we're going to be doing the same thing. This is going to be a record. And if we look at the data returned by this endpoint, we can see that it returns a metadata object and a time series daily. And this is literally what I've represented in the stock history response. Same logic as earlier, only difference is this time we've got two records inside this main record called stock history response. So let's go back to our stock client. Let's import this, and the error is gone. And let's go back to our stock service. Let's return a response. This one returns a stock history response. Response equals to get stock history response. We want to do something like this. We want to take this response, which looks like this. So the time series is a map of string and daily prices. So what I'm simply doing is using a lambda to basically limit the result back to days. And in this case, days is 30. So let's say the client only wanted 2. So this would just limit it to 2. You might be wondering, like, why is there no day parameter here? I believe it does not exist in the documentation. I might be wrong, but I don't think there is a way to determine the size of the response using the Alpha Vantage API. So this is a way you can actually limit a response based on a parameter by a client. And then we're simply creating a daily stock response using whatever we got from Alpha Vantage client. And the daily stock response is what the user actually gets. It's as simple as that. I hope it wasn't too rushed. I think this is just plain Java basically. So let's go back to our controller. And we can see we have also implemented this third endpoint. So let's stop and restart this application. And let's also test the last endpoint we implemented. So let's open the API tools. Let's refresh. And we can see we've got this other endpoint called stock symbols history. So let's do it for Apple again. So I think we need to add the days. So let's do it for 10 days. And as we can see, we got back 10 days of data starting from today. And we went back 10 days. This response is looking good. This is what we actually expected. Let's now move on to some more interesting endpoints that we're going to be implementing, and we're also going to be adding a database. Let's go back to our diagram, and we can see we've got a fourth and a fifth endpoint. So one is post favorites and one is get favorites. What we really want to do here is give the client the possibility to save some favorite stock symbols inside this SQL database, which we're going to be adding in the next step. And then once the user has added some favorite stocks, let's say he comes back a day later and he wants to see the stock price for his favorite stocks, he should be able to simply call this get endpoint and get the price for his favorite stocks. So this is what we're going to be implementing. For this last endpoint, we're actually going to rely on some functionality we have built earlier in the project. So for example, we should be able to reuse the functionality we built for the first one, the get stock for a symbol. So this is our next step, adding this SQL DB to store the favorites and then give the user the ability to get back stock prices for their favorite symbols. So let's go back here and let's create a new endpoint. So we first want to give the possibility to the user to actually save favorites. So we're going to be adding a post endpoint and we'll call it favorites. And this is going to be returning a response entity, returning the favorite stock that we will be creating in the DB. And let's call it save favorite stock. This will be sent in the body. So let me just use Copilot. We have a request body. This is going to be containing the request with the favorite stock. So let's call it favorite stock request. And because this is being sent as an input, this is a good candidate to be a DTO. So let's create this DTO. This is simply going to contain a private string symbol. And let me add data, all args constructor, no args constructor, and also a builder. Let's go back to our stock controller. Let's import this. You can see that in our stock service, we're going to have add favorite, which is going to get the symbol from the request. Once this is saved, it's going to return as a favorite stock. We're going to simply return this to the client. We are going to implement this in a bit because this is not a DTO. The favorite stock is going to be the representation of our stock in the DB. So this is going to be an entity class. But for now, let's go to our stock service and let's implement this other method. This is going to be a public, it's going to return a favorite stock. So what we're going to do is create the stock in the DB and then return what we have created to the user. Call it add favorite. It's going to take as input a string symbol. What we need to do is actually first create a repository to be able to query data in the DB. And we have to create this DB itself. If we go back to our diagram, we can see that the stock tracker actually talks to SQL DB. In this case, we're going to be using H2, which is a fast in-memory database, which is going to give us the basic functionality we need to create this portfolio project. So let's go back here. We need to add few configurations in the application.properties. So if you go here, let's create this configuration. We are going to store the data in a file. This way, we won't lose the information in our database once we restart the application. Please add this line. This is just a path where this stock DB information will be saved. We're going to be using the H2 driver, a username and a password. And then we've also got some JPA Hibernate specific properties. The DDL, which is the structure of the tables, is going to be automatically updated by JPA Hibernate. Let's also see the SQL. So this is going to print out the sequels in the log file. This is quite good for debugging. And yeah, this is going to format what it prints out. And then we can also allow access to the console, which is going to be at this path h2-console. This is all we need to configure a H2 SQL DB. The next thing we need to do is actually create a table. To create a table, let's create a new package. Let's create a new package called entity. And in this entity package, we're going to have all the classes representing tables in our stock DB. So we are going to have a favorite stock. So this is an entity. So entity is a representation of data inside a SQL table in this case. And this is going to reference the table called favorite stocks. Let's add a data annotation. Let's add the builder, no args constructor and all args constructor. And this is going to be quite simple. So it's going to have an ID, which is going to be a generated value, and strategy is going to be identity. So it's going to generate a long ID, and then we are going to have a column called symbol, private string symbol. Importantly, we don't want this to be null, so we're gonna add nullable equals to false, and we also want it to be unique, so we don't want to be saving symbols multiple times. You could argue that we wouldn't really need identity in this case if this is already unique, which is kind of true. But if you think about the long term, I think having an ID, it's a good idea. The next thing we need is an interface, a repository interface to actually be able to access data in this table in our database. So let's create a repository and let's call it Stock repository. And this is going to be a repository class. This is an interface that actually extends JPA repository. This represents a favorite stock and the ID is a long. And then we also need a query in here where we're going to check if this symbol already exists. So we're gonna say exists by symbol and we're gonna pass the symbol as input. And I think we've done all the configuration we need for our database. So we can now go back to our stock service, finish up what we started. Let's also add a transactional annotation. What this means is whatever we write in this method, it either all commits to the DB. If it doesn't, if any part fails, it rolls back to the previous status. So that's what a transaction is in very simple words. Let's check if this symbol already exists. So one thing we forgot is actually we need to auto wire this repository to our stock service. So let's add that here at the top. And now, so favorites repository, if it exists already, let's throw an exception. Favorite already exists. Otherwise, let's create a favorite stock. To create this favorite stock, we're gonna simply create a new favorite stock object. We're gonna pass the symbol in, and then we will return what we have saved in the DB. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're gonna be saving this favorite stock to the repository. ID will be assigned. Once the ID is assigned and this is saved in the DB, this will be returned to the controller. So let's import this, and I think we are ready to start this and test if we can save favorites. Let's run this. And let's see if we can actually use these API tools to send a post request. So we can see we need to pass a symbol. In this case, I'm going to be saving Apple. Let's click send. This got saved. It has ID 1. Let's also save IBM. So this got ID 2. Let's also save Oracle. So this got saved as well. Now let's verify if this actually exists in the DB. To do that, just open a new browser page and let's go to localhost 8080/h2 console. You will see this page. So just put the URL of the file where the data is going to be. Username is SA and let's connect. You're going to be sent to this page. So if you click on favorite stocks, as you can see, the table has been created. Let's run a select and we can see our symbols are being saved, our favorite symbols. So if you go back here, let's see what happens if we try to save a symbol twice. As you can see, we get a 500 back. Basically, you're gonna get an error being sent back to the user. We want this to look better. It doesn't look good. So what we are going to also do now is improve this exception message. So we don't want this to be shown to the client if the symbol already exists. So let's close this and let's create a custom exception. I think it's going to improve our project by quite a bit. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be creating a custom exception. So let's create a new package and let's call it exception. In here, I'm going to call this exception a favorite already exists exception class. And this is going to be a runtime exception. So this only happens at runtime when the application is running. We're creating a favorite already exists exception object. As input, we're going to pass the symbol, and this is the message that we want to show back to the user, to the client. So we need another thing now. It's a global exception handler, actually. So let's create a new class and let's call it global exception handler. And this is going to be tagged as controller advice. So what we want this exception handler to do is catch all of the favorite already exist exceptions. Let's add exception handler and let's define the exception we want this class to handle. In this case is the favorite already exist exception. And now we need to define what we want our handler to do in case this exception is thrown. So we want to return a response entity type string. Let's call it handle favorite already exists exception. This exception is going to be passed as input. And then we're going to be returning a response entity dot status. So we don't want a 500, we want something else. So I'll call it http status dot conflict. And the body, we want it to be the message we defined earlier. We have now a custom exception. So we can go back to our stock service. In here, we now want to throw a favorite already exists exception. And as input, we're going to be passing the symbol. Let's run this. Let's see what happens if I try to save Oracle again. As you can see, the response looks way better. So we get an actual string and it says what has gone wrong. So in this case, the symbol already exists and has already been saved. We have done a little improvement in our little project. The next thing we need to now do is actually get the favorites and return back to the user a list of the stock prices for all the favorites. So this is the endpoint we're going to be implementing now, the get API stocks favorites. So let's go back to our code. Let's close this and let's stop. Let's go back to our controller class. So in here we want to add a new endpoint, and this time is going to be a get endpoint. And it's going to get us all the stock prices for our favorite stocks. So this is going to be return a list of stock response. So this stock response is the object we created earlier. It's the DTO we created as part of the first endpoint we created. And we're going to call this get favorites with prices, return stock service.get favorites with live prices. So let's go to our stock service class. And in here, we want to add a new method. So this method is actually going to be returning a list of stock response. It's going to be called get favorites with live prices, no parameter. And we want to have a list of favorite stock first. So we're going to retrieve all the favorites from the DB. And we're going to be using the repository.findAll. So this will return us all the favorite stock symbols we have in the database. And then for each favorites, we want to actually get the live stock price. So let's use the lambda. So for each favorite, let's do a get stock for symbol, which is the method we have implemented at the beginning. Let's pass the symbol. Let's use the favorite.get symbol. And then we want to collect it as a list. Collect, and let's use the list collector. So what this is going to be doing is getting all the favorites, and then for each favorite symbol is going to be getting the price and putting it together in a list of stock responses. This is all we need. So let's start this. Let's go to our API tools. Let's refresh and we're going to be seeing a new endpoint. Let's do a send. We should get back 3 responses. So one was Apple in our favorites, one was IBM, and the third one was Oracle. And you can see we're getting the latest prices for each of these stocks. One thing you might have noticed is that we have called the stock prices quite some times. So the stock market is now closed, so it doesn't make sense to make a new request every time to AlphaVantage API. Also because we know we have limits, and in a real world scenario, the more you use an API, the more you pay. And in our case, even though we're using the free API key, we still have 25 requests per day, I believe. It would be a good thing to add some caching, especially in the get stock for symbol application. If you go back to our diagram, you can see we have some caching here, and that's exactly where this caching is going to be sitting. So before hitting the stocks API, let's add a cache where we're going to be caching the price for a stock. So we are going to be using a very simple caching mechanism, which is the Spring Boot cache. So let's use the cacheable annotation. Let's give a value, which is going to be the stocks. And the key in this case is going to be the stock symbol. So this is the name of the cache and this is the key. So whenever we are going to be getting the same stock symbol, we can simply try and get the value from the stocks cache. And the other thing we need to do is add a Spring cache type in our application.properties. So in this case, we need to add this annotation, spring.cache.type equals simple. And we need to enable caching in our application. So that has to be at application level, and we need to add enable caching annotation. So if we stop and rerun this, we should see an improvement in response times when we call for the same stock symbol, whether it be for favorites or like the direct stock symbol. So let's try. Took 629 milliseconds. The second call took literally 7 seconds, which is so many times faster. So this is literally hitting the cache, and that way we also save our requests, the free requests we got per day. So we have implemented all of the endpoints we set out at the beginning. This should give you the tools to expand this portfolio project even further and add cool features. Let's say you could hook this up into AI and pass on stock data for a company and try to predict future values, or you can have some financial analysis done by AI. There are also other improvements if you are looking for technical things you can showcase to a future employer, for example. So you could try to add better caching. At the moment, we have not specified eviction policies, so you could add those. You could also add some kind of asynchronous communication using Kafka and many more things. Really, like this was supposed to give you an example of what you can achieve with a third-party stock API using Spring Boot. And if you've ever wondered how I keep my coding skills sharp all year round, let me introduce you to Brilliant. Brilliant helps you become a better thinker and problem solver with thousands of visual, interactive lessons in math, science, programming, data analysis, and AI. Learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for personal and professional growth. Brilliant keeps you on track to reaching your learning goals, one day at a time. The Brilliant app makes it easy to learn anywhere with fun, hands-on lessons. Whether you are diving into a new topic or doing a quick practice session, you can level up at home or on the go. To learn for free on Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/LeetJourney, scan the QR code on screen or click on the link in the description. Brilliant has also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant. Huge thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video.